Hello and welcome back to Tinker Talks Guns. Today we're here to talk about the U.S. Revolver Company 38 double action. And to do that, we're going to have to talk about the Iver Johnson double action safety Hammerless, because U.S. Revolver Company was a trade name registered by Iver Johnson. And U.S. revolvers weren't really not Iver Johnson's. So, in about 1891, Iver Johnson introduced the double-action safety Hammerless in 32 and 38 caliber. And it had a nice transfer bar safety so that you could not detonate a cartridge because the hammer can't hit the firing pin unless the trigger is pulled all the way so that the transfer bar is in place to transfer the strike of the hammer to the firing pin. And when it does, it stays sticking out until you release the trigger. Now, the first model included features like the hammer shroud, trigger safety, things like that were eliminated on the second model because they were found to be unnecessary and it was more economical not to have them. So the second model had a solid frame and was essentially this gun with a couple of minor differences. So why did Iver Johnson make U.S. Revolver Company revolvers? This is not a separate company that they were making them for. So let me explain. The safety Hammerless was going along well. Things are going well for Iver Johnson. And in 1909, they introduced their third model, which had some improvements. For example, the cylinder can rotate in its direction of travel normally. It's not locked between shots. It only locks when you pull the trigger. And that was pretty typical of guns of its time. But it was suboptimal. So the third model had a cylinder that locks between shots. Nice feature. Frame's a little thicker. There's an extra pin to accommodate the lock for the cylinder and such like, but by and large, it's pretty much the same gun. So they needed a reason for people to buy it. And esoterical details like the cylinder not free rotating were not going to appeal to most buyers. So the third model Iver Johnson was rated for smokeless powder, implying that the previous guns were not safe for smokeless powder. But they still had a bunch of parts for the second model. What to do? Why waste them? They registered the trade name U.S. Revolver Company and continued to manufacture the second model. They did make some changes. They went to a rebounding firing pin and eliminated the transfer bars. We'll talk about more in the tabletop. But other than that, it was the same gun. They used second model frames, cylinders, and barrels. And they were advertised as an economical revolver, safe for all modern ammunition. Well, in that pre-World War I time period, the only type of modern ammunition, as opposed to the same black powder they'd always been making, was smokeless ammunition. They were essentially saying that this was an economy revolver that could be fired with smokeless ammunition. In fact, people had been firing smokeless ammunition of them practically from the start, because that was, the revolvers were introduced at the same time smokeless ammunition was. And the manufacturers of ammunition, who were no more eager to be sued than anyone, made smokeless ammunition that worked in existing guns. But stuff happens. In this case, what happened was a bunch of people who reload their own ammo got a hold of the new smokeless powder and, like idiots, loaded it just like it was black powder. The way you load black powder in a cartridge is you put in as much powder as will fit that you can still stuff a bullet in. If you do that with smokeless powder, you put it in your gun, pull the trigger, and the gun explodes. Because smokeless powder is ounce for ounce, gram for gram, grain for grain, significantly more energetic than black powder. So the notion arose that it was unsafe to fire smokeless ammunition in black powder guns, and Iver Johnson saw this as a way to get people to buy their new third model guns, even though it was not true. To this day, the gun community believes that you can't fire smokeless loads in black powder guns. And in reality, there's no such thing as a black powder gun and a smokeless gun. There are only guns in certain calibers. Now, this is not to say you should fire any smokeless load you want in any gun, because, for example, the British 38-200 will chamber in a 38 Smith & Wesson top break revolver, and it won't blow it up, but it will quickly wear it out and make things break because it's more powerful than was intended. Modern buffalo bore 38 Smith & Wesson ammunition, which specifically states that it is not for top break revolvers, will break these guns in short order, although I've never heard of it blowing one up. So if you're going to use smokeless ammo in antique guns, either use factory-loaded ammunition intended for them, or load your own, but research what sorts of loads are safe in these old guns. Anyway, there's the sermon for the day. Let's go to the tabletop and have a look at these guns. So the U.S. revolver is absolutely typical of top-break double-action revolvers marketed for self-defense in its time, which was from roughly 1909 until 1940 or so. I believe they stopped production at the dawn of World War II. And, of course, revolvers similar to this had been produced since the 1880s. So, it has a 3 1/4 inch barrel, pretty standard. It has a half-round front sight, a tiny but surprisingly useful rear sight. It auto-ejects, and then the ejector retracts. It has a double-action only mechanism, and the trigger pull is heavy, but reasonably smooth, especially for an economy gun. The trigger breaks at 11.5 pounds. So, as I said, it is heavy. Now, this is in most essentials an Iver Johnson 38 double action safety hammerless second model, because the first model had the trigger safety, and the hammer shroud is a separate piece pinned in place. For the second model, they eliminated the trigger safety and made the hammer shroud in one piece with the frame, which doubtless was, an economy measure, because there's no good reason to have the hammer shroud removable. So, this is, in almost every particular, an Iver Johnson 38 double action safety hammerless, except one. So, the safety hammerless mechanism from Iver Johnson uses a floating firing pin mounted in the frame. When you pull the trigger all the way, the hammer stays forward until you release the trigger. Now, there is a transfer bar that prevents the hammer from hitting the firing pin. Thus, the safety in the safety hammerless. The U.S. revolver has the exact same type of screw and bushing and a floating firing pin mounted in the frame, and when you pull the trigger, the firing pin pops out and retracts so fast the camera probably didn't catch it. And then, just like the other gun, the hammer is brought back from the firing pin after you release the trigger. So the only real difference is the absence of the transfer bar for the safety, which I'm told was a cost-saving measure because it saves you the part, the fitting, etc., etc. Now, theoretically, if you drop this gun from several stories up and it landed directly on the muzzle with a cartridge under the firing pin, it could possibly cause the hammer to hit the firing pin and detonate the cartridge. Maybe. Honestly, in practice, this gun is probably just as safe as this gun. But it's just cheaper and made under a different brand, which, as you can see, it says U.S. Revolver Company, made in the USA here, and has a serial number here. There are no other markings on the gun, no listing of caliber, but, 38 Smith & Wesson was the only thing that would fit, so it's kind of a no-brainer. Unfortunately, I have not found any resource that would allow me to associate this serial number with a particular date of manufacture. So it's between 1909 and World War II. Now, this one is in remarkably good condition. It is at least 90% finish, maybe even a little better. The grips are pristine. And while the bluing is on the trigger guard is old, it's pretty complete and in good condition. So this is a fantastic example of this gun, and I think I paid, $100, $125 for it. If you haunt your local pawn shops and gun stores, you can often find guns like this in that price range even today. The bad news is you're probably going to want to reload your own ammo because 38 Smith & Wesson ammo is not that common on the shelves and tends to be somewhat expensive and can have other issues, which we'll address next. So the U.S. Revolver 38 double action is a serviceable gun that pretty much anyone could afford, and it was better quality than a lot of them out there by various manufacturers. It was a very reasonable thing for a working person to take their hard-earned dollars and go spend $3.50 of them on $4 of them, whatever, on one of these. And likely it would do what they needed it to just fine. Other than that, it's pretty undistinguished. What really makes it interesting is the juxtaposition between it and the revolvers of its parents' company, Iver Johnson. But this one is a fine old gun. Despite the heavy trigger pull, it's quite easy to shoot accurately at the sorts of range it was anticipated to be used, which is 5 to 7 yards at most. And it's a nice piece of history, and it's a nice experience to shoot the sorts of guns that normal, everyday working people could afford and frequently bought in the period. Now, I will say this. I did say I would get back to it in the image of the target. You will note that 3 of the bullets hit sideways. They were yawing, even at 5 yards. 2 of the bullets hit straight on, just as they should. Interesting fact. 2 of the cartridges, were my reloads, which used .361 diameter bullets, which is the nominal bore diameter of 38 Smith & Wesson. 3 of them were Winchester Western factory loads. Can you guess which 3 hit sideways? The factory loads. And there's a reason for this. 38 Smith & Wesson is barely still manufactured. And not a lot of people buy it, and it's not worth putting a lot of effort into. So some years back, some of the ammunition manufacturers took to using what effectively is shortened 38 Smith & Wesson special cartridges loaded with .357 diameter bullets. And that would be fine if the lead is soft enough. The bullets will upset and fill the bore and, work as they should and hit the target face first, the way they're supposed to. And all is happy in the light. Sometime back, and I wish I could still find the bullet, but I pulled the bullet from one of the Winchesters after noting an exceptionally large number of keyholed bullets, and I measured it, and it was not .361. It was not, in fact, .357. It was .354, which is way too small. So it's not really any wonder that most of them, if not all of them, are hitting the target sideways, because they're not engaging the rifling and stabilizing. Remington, I have noted, also uses small diameter bullets, but theirs are .357, and while I have had uneven results with them, at least most of them hit the target going straight. Not all of them, but most of them. So as a consequence, I genuinely would not recommend Winchester Western 38 Smith & Wesson ammunition unless all you care about is that the gun goes bang. Because, I don't know, maybe it was this specific lot? Maybe not. But why find out? Anyway, I hope you liked the video. If you did, hit like. It only takes a second, and it really helps the channel. If you want to see more, subscribe. Leaving a comment also helps YouTube realize that I exist and distribute the videos to a wider audience. And another thing you can do is all of this costs money. These videos are also streamed to Utreon, where if you like, you can subscribe to my channel, which will help. Or there's a link to my Patreon account in the description below, and kicking $1 or so a month my way adds up and will genuinely help the channel, because all of this costs money. Ammo, primers, guns, it all costs money. Anyway, shout out to my Patreon supporters, because you do genuinely help make this happen. So, hope this finds you well, stay safe, take care, and we'll talk to you again real soon.